Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and everybody else in between, I'm Ashton G. Lewis. This is the Broke Boy Sports Podcast, and as you can imagine, I have a strange feeling I'm also not on the starting slide for this show. So let me click on, yep, there we go, baby. Let's go from the top here. Anyway, shout out to everybody who showed up late last night, or really early, way too early on Sunday morning for the NFL preview show that I did. I promise you it'll be at a better time this upcoming week now that we're back on schedule, because I'm doing this show here on a wonderful Tuesday at around 9 o'clock, trying to get this done before 10 o'clock, trying to keep it short and compact because I got a lot of other stuff to do. Not because I don't want to hang out with you, but I do have things to do. I have a life and a weird family situation going on that I'm trying to figure out. Anyway, let's take it from the top. If you're unfamiliar with this version of the Broke Boy Sports Podcast, and just like the title says, I only talk about the NFL. So NFL Week 4, it's so many games, especially right now. Bye weeks start this upcoming week. There's a lot of people coming out the PUP list. There's a lot of people who are there's people who are getting off suspension, in particular Jameson Williams, who I'm sure you're going to hear a shit ton about if you haven't already, about how he's going to turn, the Lions into some even more souped up version of what we can only describe as a dream come true to a certain degree, because you love to see sports fans that have been suffering for a very, very long time finally get their time to shine in the sun. I would also like to point out the Rams are kind of getting the dose of what the Lions fans have been dealing with for the past couple of years, and we'll talk about that when we get to it. Anyway, we start off this show with the nuke. If you're unfamiliar with the term the nuke, it is the player that, if you're a fantasy football participant, I'm not going to sit here and explain fantasy football. If you don't know how to play fantasy football, there's a lot more smarter people on the internet that can tell you the basics of it and the more complicated version of it as well. So, the nuke is a player that played in the NFL this week that if they were on your opponent's team, it didn't actually matter what your team did, because there was no stopping them whatsoever. They scored so many points that they were lopsided to the degree that everybody else on your opponent's team could have underperformed, and they still would have gotten like 200 points. And I think it was pretty cut and dry this week. It was the true number one scoring player in the NFL this week, which has been kind of weird because usually a quarterback, but this week it is CMC. Back at it again. He has been on an absolute tear. I'm sure you've heard already. He's got the record that he's got going right now. I think it's 13 or 14 consecutive games with the 49ers where he scored a touchdown, which makes him either tied or surpassing Jerry Rice. Yes, that Jerry Rice will not be the only time we actually refer to Jerry Rice. Somebody else is doing some pretty cool stuff too. But versus the Arizona Cardinals, the Christian McCaffrey had 20 carries, 106 yards. He actually had like 3 touchdowns in the first half of their game. 3 rushing touchdowns, 7 catches, almost 100 yards. Like, legitimately, if you took either one of these stat setups and just gave it to like one player, you'd call that a great day for that individual player, especially if you had a running back with 3 rushing touchdowns and the yards to go along with it. Kind of crazy. Not kind of crazy, very crazy, but normal for peak Christian McCaffrey, if you're familiar with his work previously with the artist formerly known as the Carolina Panthers. So, that being said, that was pretty cut and dry. That was probably the easiest nuke I've had, because with the Dolphins thing, there was a bunch of players who actually did really well. In particular, it was like between Raheem Mostert and Devon A-Chain did a killer job, but nonetheless, 20 carries, 106 yards, 3 rushing touchdowns, 7 catches. So that's the PPR points. The 10, that's 7 points for the reception yards. And then, of course, the 6 points that go along for scoring the touchdowns times 4. It depends on what kind of league you're in, but for the most part, he scored at minimum, he scored you 40 points if you play in like a standard league or whatever. So he basically destroyed anybody's ability to be able to have a reasonable game, unless you had more than 3 parts of the perfect lineup or something for fantasy. Every week, I always find that intriguing. I feel like I need to like look it up every once in a while, because there's been times where I was in a fantasy football league for like $1,000 or whatever, the most I've ever played fantasy football for, and I felt like multiple weeks throughout the course of the season, I, one, went up against the team that scored the most points in the league, but 2, it felt like they had the perfect lineup, which is when you have all of the players who scored the most points at their individual position possible. So like the highest scoring per position possible. So like if it's a flex, the highest scoring either wide receiver, running back, or tight end, or whatever it may be. And it's always interesting to see how that all shakes out because they're usually never on the same team. And sometimes it's weird. They'll have like a great game and their team will lose. So it's pretty funny. Moving on, we got streaks, peaks, and ditches. If you're unfamiliar with this category and with this segment, I'll explain it when we get to it, which is right now. So we have streaks, which are players who have like some sort of streak going on, whether it be positive or negative. We have peaks, which is somebody, obviously hitting a peak of some sort in terms of a career high. And then we have ditches, a career low in some cases. A lot of them early on in the season, they typically start off as like team things. They start off as like team streaks, team peaks, team ditches, and stuff like that. And as time goes on, we get more into like the personal player ones because we start to see people who could potentially be having like a legendary season. For instance, I think the all-time single season tackle record is on the line with Zaire Franklin because he has 45 tackles. He has over 45 tackles through the course of 4 games. Insane, bro. Anyway, let's take it from the top. We got a peak to start off with here. If you didn't watch the Bills versus the Dolphins, I totally understand why. It's actually kind of fun at the beginning, and then real life happened. Stephon Diggs is one of 4 wide receivers ever with 120 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns in a singular game. To do it multiple times, by the way. He has 4 games that are like this. These other players on this list right here also have at least 4. I think this is Wes Walker, if I recall correctly, but it's Randy Moss, Marvin Harrison, and Jerry Rice. Very, very good company to be in if you're a wide receiver. Moving on, number 2 on this one, we got, this is actually just me being mean because I hate the Giants so very much for a multitude of reasons. Mostly having to deal with what they did this past summer in terms of like paying the guy who clearly is not the guy and then not paying the guy who actually is the guy. And it was pretty obvious. So with an audience of 6.6 million viewers, the Seahawks-Giants game that was on Monday Night Football that finished with the final score 24-3 and 11 sacks for the Seahawks, the career high, team high ever for franchise high for the Seattle Seahawks in the moment. On Monday Night Football, it was the highest rated Monday Night Football game for Week 4 in 14 years. I don't know why so many people were watching that game. Maybe it's the power of watching New York football. If you're a Giants fan, you should have given up on the season like 2 weeks ago. These guys are probably not going to turn it around because the guy who's at the forefront of everything is not the dude. But hey, I guess that's a lesson for another day. Maybe you take care of the people who take care of you and they keep taking care of you. Anyway, Saquon Barkley didn't play in this game, and what do you know? The Giants look like absolute dog shit. Who would have thought? Who would have thought? By the way, the peak of this was almost 20 million people watching this game, which is great for ESPN because they spend a shit ton of money on these live broadcasts, and the more likely they are to make money back in terms of ad revenue to be able to boost those numbers up, the easier it is for the current situation for the broadcasters that are there, the employees that are there. Like a lot of the layoffs happened this past summer, and I think a good chunk of us can agree that some people that we enjoy seeing on TV or whatever platform ESPN has them on, we enjoy seeing their stuff. Them not being there is pretty bad. Obviously for me, Bomani Jones, the guy that I look up to in terms of being a podcaster and being a sportscaster in general, he gets fired, gets laid off. His contract doesn't get renewed. He obviously was making a ton of money. He's been there for a long time. He's like a very prominent voice within the world of sports, and when he speaks, it pisses off a lot of people, and he usually makes points that are really difficult for idiots to refute. So, that being said, RIP to the right time. RIP to the right time. Anyway, but yeah, when you see numbers like this, like record high numbers in 14 years, Monday Night Football being back better than it was back in the day when there were fewer channels for people to watch, and I say that as if 14 years ago was like 1987 or whatever, but nonetheless, like there's different platforms there's different things that people can be doing. Me, objectively, I saw this game, knew the Seahawks were going to dominate. Didn't know it was going to be that bad, but knew the Seahawks were going to kick the Giants' ass. Like, it wasn't even a question for me. Whatever. Moving on to the next thing. Were we on 3? We're on 3. We're on 3 right now. Only one team has made the playoffs after starting the season 0-4 in NFL history. I'm sure you heard this one a bunch of different times this past weekend. It is the 1992 San Diego Superchargers. That's important because there are 2 0-4 teams as of right now. I'm going to be honest. One of them shouldn't surprise you all that much. The other one, it's kind of a bummer because if you've been watching them play football, they actually have like a pretty decent team. Obviously, making the playoffs doesn't mean that you're not gonna, have a good season overall, especially considering where both of these teams are in terms of what we believe the plan is for the higher ups for the team. They're in a developmental stage for a lot of players that are on the field. They're looking for the star quarterback to build their entire team around. They're still looking for talented players to fill out a bunch of other different roles. For instance, for both of these guys, the offensive line situation is a little suspect. And when I say both of these guys, I'm talking about Bryce Young and Justin Fields, right? So Bryce Young, rookie quarterback, and we'll talk about what happened in their game versus the Vikings because that very easily could have gone the exact opposite direction, and we could have been talking about how the Vikings are not going to be able to make the playoffs. Don't worry, the odds if you're 0-3 to start the season are significantly, like slightly better than when you're 0-4, and when I say slightly, I mean very slight. So, I have a strange feeling that Bryce Young and Kirk Cousins are going to be at the same place come the end of the season. I will also point this out. Because there is objectively more games have been added to the season since 1992, it does increase the chances that a team that starts the season 0-4 can rally enough to be able to be successful and come out with a winning record. So if you think about it, if you start the season 0-4, that's the first month of the season. You have to spend an entire month to get back to 500, while other teams are, like dancing around 6-2, 5-3, all that kind of stuff like that. And you're trying to just get back to 4-4. And that's like your best objective. And it's just one of those things where like you come out of the blocks slow and you spend time that you could have been spending trying to get the lead, basically trying to get back to 0, and it takes more effort to get back to 500 than it does to be like, oh, we started the season 4-0 and we kind of dropped some games here and there, right? Also, the mental fortitude of football players can only go so long, and when you start 0-4, which we're going to talk about one of these teams, it is very clear that there's a mental break that is happening, and that does matter when it comes to playing professional sports. Moving on. Peak. Anthony Richardson, quarterback for the Indianapolis Colts, is the first QB in the history of the NFL with 4 rushing touchdowns through 3 games. Not a surprise, especially if you see how erratic that young man is on the field. His level of chaos is a healthy amount. I just hope that he's able to figure out when the big people are running towards him to get out of the way. That would be really nice. I understand he is a big person as well, but sometimes, 2 big things hit each other. Both big things get hurt. The last one on this one, actually, that was my last one. Anthony Richardson, that was the Jacoby Myers one from a couple weeks ago. My bad on that one. But yeah, with that being said, that is Streaks, Peaks, and Ditches, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be back with that segment next week. I mean, I do it every week. So, yeah. Anyway, let's talk about some stuff. We got the games broken up. If you're not familiar, we have 4 categories that we use here on the Broke Boy Sports Podcast to identify how well or poorly each game in the NFL went that week. So we have the Snooze Fest games. Obviously, those are the games that I enjoyed the least personally when I watched them. I'm gonna be honest with you, the last 2 weeks, I basically have watched like a combination of like 2 games on Sunday, whereas I used to be able to watch like 5 or 6, and then I'll go back and kind of refresh myself on Monday or Tuesday. I'm basically spending all day Monday during the day and all day Tuesday during the day watching every single game over on NFL Sunday. So it's a little tough. I can't lie. I'm basically like losing a day for preparation for this podcast because of what I've been having to do the last 2 Sundays. Anyway, that should be changing here pretty soon. We move on. We have the Snooze Fest category. We have the Heartbreakers category, where we have 2 different things. Like there's a multitude of ways that a game can break your heart. So There are games that come down to it where one team performs so absolutely amazing, and then the game gets snatched away from them at the last second. And then there's the overall heartbreak that comes with playing in the NFL season, where you've been playing for so long, and the futility is starting to build up in you. Your frustration as a competitor starts to kind of leak over into like a negative mental health space, and you can tell that this is the game where the season goes. The season that was completely off the rails is going to continue to go further off the rails, whether it be stuff happening in the media, whether it be like the actual physical football that's being played on the field is going to change drastically. And this is, of course, where we get to the point where people who have not ever been in the team locker room whatsoever, haven't been to a single media day, or are on radio and television talking about how the coaches lost the locker room, right? People are starting... Unnamed sources start popping up left and right. So, right, it's that kind of game. We're getting towards that. We're 1 month into it. There's one team at the top of this list. A couple of teams probably, let's be honest, like 2 or 3 losses away from being on this list, but we take that with a grain of salt. So we got Snooze Fest, the Heartbreakers category. We have the third category, which is called Oh My. And it's one of those games where the result says something that you didn't think was possible, or didn't think was like something that team can put together, right? So it's like a blowout from one team, and you're wondering like, oh damn, that's like a really bad game from this one other team, or it's a surprising result in terms of like didn't know that team was going to be so definitive or could win definitively like that. And the other one is this is what we're here for is the final category, and those are the games that you watch and it makes you remember why you became a fan of NFL football. It's the games that you watch and you enjoy that make fans for people who are watching those games for the first time ever, that make them want to come back for the following week. So usually that category is a little sparse. What was it, 2 weeks ago, there was I think like 5 games, and it was like week 2, obviously. That was maybe a tad bit of me being excited about football being back. Let's take it from the top, shall we? The Snooze Fest games on this one. So we start off with Monday Night Football. I can actually do these without using my notes, which is super dope for me personally. The Seahawks played the Giants. Well, the Seahawks played a football game, and the New York Giants were there. So there's a good chunk of people who are trying to push this propaganda about how the Giants are probably a year away. And I'm like, a year away from what? A year away from what? So they keep saying that the Giants are basically a year away due to the fact that they have some offensive linemen that are clearly trending in the right direction, but they just don't have the experience to go along with it, right? Like that's the biggest thing to take away from what a lot of people are talking about for the Giants up front. They got a lot of big dudes. They got the biggest dudes, right? And it takes a while for them to get accustomed to NFL speed, especially when you're talking about the Seahawks defensive line up front, or the Seahawks front seven, which has a good amount of experience in comparison to the other front sevens across the NFL. Nwosu has continued to prove himself to be invaluable as the lead pass rusher for the Seattle Seahawks up front, which is super dope. But that being said, that game, super embarrassing for the Giants. Not surprising for me personally. Daniel Jones really has a tough time making decisions on the run. Now, and this is one thing too, like I never gave Daniel Jones like a fair shake in the aspect of wondering whether or not his wide receivers are actually getting open. I don't have access to all 22 film and stuff like that, or else I'd be able to kind of give you a definitive answer. But at some point, it's hard to believe that his wide receivers are completely covered every single snap, right? Every single time he takes off and run, which, by the way, when are we going to start having the conversation about how Daniel Jones is not quick but fast, and how that makes a big difference in terms of being able to escape from the pocket? He's very good in terms of like open space when he gets a chance to, get his feet underneath him and take off and run. That doesn't mean that he's agile in the pocket in terms of escaping, which is the kind of stuff we attribute to players like Kyler Murray and Lamar Jackson, right? There's a big difference, right? That shows itself at times. And if we're not going to be able to pass the ball and we can't run the ball when we don't have Saquon Barkley in the game, we're going to have a tough time. And that's brutal considering what we know about the Giants defense, which we know it's not that bad. They're just getting put in terrible situations almost every single time they come out to go to work, right? They get torn apart in this one. The Seahawks didn't have to do anything exceptional to go out here and beat the Giants. They could have, they could have ran the score up on them. Geno Smith has more than enough ability to be able to do that. Kenneth Walker III, once again, Pete Carroll shows up and continues to point the middle finger at all the nerds that don't believe in running the ball. It's so weird how, the Giants don't believe in running the ball in the situation that they're in, whereas, the Seahawks are essentially the polar opposite of the Giants in the sense that, they invested in some offensive linemen. They've invested in Charles Cross and some others, and it's panned out for them. They got Geno Smith, a quarterback that had a great season last year, same year that Daniel Jones had a great year, and they chose not to pay him it's $44 million a year, right? They chose to pay him a reasonable amount based off of the fact that there's no consistency that you've proven to have when it comes to playing at this level, right? They believe in the running game. They got a young running back. They give him the ball as much as they possibly can because they value being able to gain yards in a multitude of ways and control the clock. 24-3. Polar opposite teams, right? The Seahawks defense takes another huge step in the right direction. Devin Witherspoon with a massive pick six as the Giants were trying to close the gap and make it a one-possession game. Let's not kind of, let's not look it over that the fact that the Giants got sacked, or Daniel Jones got sacked 11 times, and they still figured out a way to kind of make it close, right? The defense for the Seahawks has found yet another young budding superstar. So they got Kobe Bryant, they got Reek out there as well, playing the number one corner spot, and then they got Devin Witherspoon who plays the big nickel spot. By the way, some of these announcers out here, y'all need to be careful when y'all say that nickel. Y'all need to enunciate is the way that I'll say. But yeah, it was tough. The toughest part of the night was obviously Jamal Adams going out on the first drive of the night, him ducking his head trying to tackle Daniel Jones, and then Daniel, trying to get away from Jamal's tackle. His knee goes into the side of his head, and it injures Jamal Adams. Again, he loses it on the sideline, which, by the way, I don't know how many people pointed this out on the internet, but one of the major symptoms for a sign of a concussion, which they have to assume that he had based off of what happened on the field, right? Even if he went back and passed concussion protocol, at one point it did look like he was not conscious. But the other thing to take away from it is erratic emotional response is a big part of concussions. I can confirm, as a person who's one, seen it with his own eyes, and then two, heard the story about it one time where he popped up, he seemed like he was all right, but then on the sideline he kind of got real rowdy. They let him back into the game, and then it seemed like his temper was a lot shorter. Just in general, I've heard that one before, right? I've heard random crying. That one's always the Luke Kuechly situation, for those of you who are familiar, that night that we all watched on Monday Night Football, where Luke Kuechly went in to stop the run against somebody. He got textbook, lowered his head, lowered his helmet, his neck got put in a weird place or whatever, and his head snapped back. He pops up, they help him back onto the cart, and he's just bawling his eyes out. And they ask him at practice the next day, because he's back at practice the next day, because that's what a normal person does. Anyway, he tells them that. And they tell him, or he tells the media, he doesn't remember it at all. He doesn't remember crying his eyes out. So he can't tell you why he was. Anyway, that's what happened with the Seahawks and the Giants. Toodaloo. Anyway, the Seahawks get another win. They're 3-1 on the season. They have they've played an interesting style of football, but it seems like there's just all this talent that's circling around the team, and it's that weird blend of old guys and young guys that you kind of need to be successful in the NFL. But the Cowboys played the Patriots. So the defense for the Cowboys outscored the Patriots in this game. The defense for the Cowboys scored 2 touchdowns. There was a pick six and a fumble recovery, right? Mac Jones, not long for this world. And when I say this world, I mean the world of starting quarterbacks in the NFL, right? Bailey Zappi, who, by the way, if he does end up being the guy that they replace Mac Jones with, the funny part is if you recall, this is a big story when cutdown day happened. The Patriots had only Mac Jones listed on the depth chart as a quarterback. So they would be starting a guy who ended up signing to their practice squad, by the way. So that'd be kind of wild. But I would assume that Bailey hasn't shown too much in practice to be able to usurp Mac Jones, which, once again, bigger problem in and of itself. Bailey came out there and he did what a lot of I live in Houston, and honestly, there's a shit ton of dust in my room, and I had to dust my entire room today. Plus, there's allergy stuff outside, so if you hear the sniffling, that's what that is. But going back to Mac Jones and Bailey Zappi, the coaching staff didn't feel like Bailey outperformed Mac Jones, which, they thought that the first time too, and then he went out there and he looked pretty good, and then they had to swap Mac Jones back into the game because Bailey was getting kind of erratic and a little out of control. Who knows what happens this second time around? All I know is that if you're the Patriots, you're not really trying to invest free agency dollars in like some kind of in a quarterback. You're trying to, you're trying to push it all the way down to the draft, and you're trying to make it happen, man. You're probably just trying not to come in last place in the division, even though at some point you got to stop hanging on to it, man, right? Like, at some point, you just got to let it go. At some point, you just got to let it all go. And maybe this is the year that the Patriots let it all go. Because they have a ridiculously talented defense that is now finding itself hit with injuries left and right almost every single game. They got a multitude of problems when it comes to, like, the secondary. And luckily for them, they draft pretty well when it comes to defensive players. But when it comes down to it, they want their starters in the game, and they're having a tough time fielding all of their starters. Case in point, 38 points on the board. I will point out 14 on these points did come from the defense, so there's nothing that the Patriots defense could have done about that. But all the time that they spend on the field eventually wears them down. If you make a defense, no matter how talented it is, play the entirety of a football game, eventually they're going to let some points get scored. And if you don't have the ability to respond, you ain't got the ability to respond. Speaking of the ability to respond, the Vikings played the Panthers. I actually have notes on this. This is the game that I took way too many notes on, so we're gonna read those. We're gonna read those on this one. No lie, this was the wildest part to start off the game. The Vikings came out and they were like, "We are here to establish the run. We are here to establish the run." Mainly because they just traded for Cam Akers, and they've been trying to figure out how to get like Alexander Madison a little bit looser out there, make some stuff happen for him, because they do need their offense to be balanced, despite the fact that they have technically the number one passing offense in the NFL. Whatever. They have the number one passing duo in the NFL. The number one passing offense probably goes to the Miami Dolphins, right? But nonetheless, that was the weird part. The Vikings came out here and they were like, you know what? This is a team that we're probably going to beat, even though the final score is 21-13. And we'll talk about what happened in this one, because there was a lot of evidence that showed that maybe the Vikings were a little bit too confident coming into this game based off of what happened when it was all said and done. So they came in, they established the run throughout the course of this game. That was kind of wild to see coming from the Minnesota Vikings, right? Did you guys know that Bryce Young is a rookie quarterback? Because he played like one. He had, in particular, about ball placement, there was a couple of times he threw behind his wide receivers. There was one time he almost killed Adam Thielen. He threw behind, and this goes back to veteran Bryce Young versus veteran experienced safeties in the NFL. They had Adrian Harrison, right? Did I say his name? Why did I feel like that's not how you say his name? Vikings number 22, Harrison. Why do I feel like that's not his first name? Harrison Smith. I don't know why. What the fuck, man? Anyway, we're kind of loopy. We spend a lot of time watching a lot of shit, right? But yeah, Harrison Smith did the thing where he baited Bryce Young into throwing at a wide receiver that he had completely covered, and Bryce Young underestimated how much space Harrison Smith could cover in a short amount of time. He throws to Adam Thielen on a crosser route. He throws it behind him. Adam Thielen, being the kind of wide receiver that he is, he actually gets his hands on it while he's fading away to the left-hand side. He reaches all the way back to the right. He gets his hands on it, and then he drops it because Harrison Smith is about to rock bottom him halfway through the catch. So it actually ended up rolling Adam Thielen's ankle, and he had to go to the sideline. And he left his cleat on, taped it up, and then put on an ice pack while they were in between drives. It was kind of weird because ice technically slows down the flow of blood into the area and prevents the inflammation from happening so that you can keep playing, right? That's the point of it. That's why they tell you that actually long periods of icing is actually bad for your injuries, despite what Rice says. Rice is like the technique, what is it? Rest, ice, circulation and elevation or something like that. So yeah, the ice part is bullshit. Anyway, the Panthers didn't want him to throw the ball, and it was like really clear. They spent a lot of time trying to establish the run, is the way I'm going to say it. But yeah, they spent a lot of time getting the ball to Miles Sanders, in particular Chuba Hubbard, who only got one carry last week, but in this game seemed like he outperformed Miles Sanders, which is not good for me fantasy-wise, but good to see. Two of those guys, pretty underrated running backs, and in a situation where it kind of is like every time they touch the ball, it's telegraphed to the opponent, and they play like it is. They play like everybody knows that they're going to get the ball. Kirk Cousins ends the second half of this game with another interception off of a great pass rush that allowed a D lineman to hit his arm as he released it, and it gave the ball to Grugier Hill. I'll also point out he had another interception in this one. That was just a great read by Sam Franklin II, who, by the way, has been killing it the last 3 weeks. Just saying. Yeah, Sam Franklin just dropped. They're running like cover 3 at the 15-yard line or something like that. There's an out route that's run, and Sam Franklin just sits on the route, runs it, catches it, runs that thing back. Grugier Hill, on the other hand, Kirk Cousins is he gets hit while he's throwing it, and it literally like punts the ball into the air, and Grugier Hill catches it, and I'm sure his only disappointment is that he didn't run it back for a touchdown on that one. But don't worry, they kind of they start cooking, right? Bryce starts cooking off this final drive of the first half, and then he fumbles the ball, and then the Vikings pick it up, and they run it back for a 51-yard fumble recovery touchdown. Who would have thought? Who would have thought? I had the guy's name here. Sorry, is it Wanham? Yeah, DJ Wanham has a 51-yard fumble recovery touchdown, which almost never happens because they try and make it as difficult as possible for offensive players to fumble in the NFL. But Bryce Young literally, he sees Wanham break up, or Wanham's coming off the edge. There's a middle linebacker blitz where they come down the middle, they don't pick it up. Bryce turns his back to the line of scrimmage, starts running backwards. Wanham swipes at his legs and wraps both of his legs up together. He trips, and as he's tripping, he loses the ball. Wanham pops back up and runs that thing in for a touchdown. He actually got some really cool photos out of it if you go to his Instagram account as well. You're a defensive lineman. You never know when that's going to ever happen again, so it's pretty sick, right? The following drive after that ends with them punting on 4th and 20 to let you know how it's going for the Panthers at this point during the game around the third quarter, because the first drive of the second half was looking pretty good, and then the fumble recovery thing happened. Justin Jefferson gets loose. So they get loose, and he snags a touchdown. He actually does too small, like literally too small to the defensive back that's on him, and honestly, it was pretty funny. I can't lie. It was pretty wild. The game came down to pressure for another week. The Vikings blitz pressure, which, by the way, is the only way they can really get pressure on quarterbacks they're going up against, because they have like Daniil Hunter and Yannick Ngakoue, and they still can't find a way to get to the quarterback. That's kind of tough. They use their blitz pressure. They finished the game with Harrison Smith sacking Bryce Young to let you know how things were going as well. Bryce Young showed some promise in this game, and the Panthers' running game kind of kept this game close because they kept the clock running for the most part. And I would safely say if it were not for the 51-yard touchdown turnover, the Panthers would have won this game. I feel that, like, very much so. There were 4 touchdowns scored in this game, and half of them were from defensive players. So, that's how sad this game was. I got this category that I'm working on, trying to do on a regular basis. It's called Weird Shit, and it's just like the weird stuff that happens in games. The first score of this game was that 99-yard touchdown, the 99-yard pick six that I talked about from Sam Franklin. He intercepted the ball just outside the end zone on what was a pass attempt. I don't get how it's 99 yards. I guess it's like from wherever you catch the ball at or whatever, not where the ball is spotted before the play. But yeah, it was 99 yards for a pick six. The Panthers have a reception. The Panthers, this is the weird shit category again, and I should have put this on Streak Peaks and Ditches. It's pretty sad. The Panthers didn't have a reception by a player who wasn't Adam Thielen until halfway through the second quarter. The only person that had caught a pass up until halfway through the second quarter was Adam Thielen for the Panthers. And they had multiple drives. It wasn't like one of those things where like they only had one drive or whatever. It was they had multiple drives and they literally just were not throwing the ball. And it goes back to what I was saying before. They don't want to pass the ball with Bryce Young, which is understandable. The Vikings finally got lucky in this game. I would call a fumble recovery for a touchdown in a one possession game. 21-13 was the final score in this one. A fumble recovery touchdown to help out an offense that literally couldn't get it together until the second half of this game. I would call that luck, and it's really rare to see for the Vikings to have something go their way, especially after last week with the way the ball bounced for them versus the Chargers. Kind of wild. Moving on. Other stuff. Oh, man, I hate how this thing works. Sorry if you saw that jumbled mess on the side over there. The Vikings took on the Panthers. We already talked about that one. The Jaguars played the Falcons. That was kind of cool for everybody involved, I guess. So the Jaguars played the Falcons, and they finally looked like the team that we all thought they could be. They were finally the Jaguars that we were promised. Maybe it's because of the home field advantage in London. Maybe it's because the Falcons aren't necessarily all that good. Or there's just a part of the Falcons that's really good and the thing that maybe most... Look, man, I'm the only thing that I took away from this game is... Look, man, let's be for real. The Falcons might be a quarterback away. I'm not talking. I mean, like, legitimately. We know Drake London's really good at football. We know Kyle Pitts is pretty good at football for the most part. Bijan Robinson, once again, proving himself to be quite good at the football. 103 yards in this game. And the only touchdown that the Falcons scored. Now, if you take the 2 interceptions, which, by the way, 2 turnovers in the first half. If you understand the way that the Falcons play football, they are a run-centric team. They are a slower-paced offense. A lot of their offense is centered around not necessarily getting big plays down the field. Not to say that they can't, because Drake London, I would say, is a big play wide receiver, right? But a lot of their stuff is to move up and down the field with stranger formations that are difficult for people to key in on, and then 2 shorter routes up front. It takes them a while to get down the field. So the problem with that is when you take away possessions from them, they have a tough time getting back in front. And that's saying it the nice way, because honestly, it's because they don't have an explosive offense, right? They have explosive players, not necessarily an explosive offense. But yeah, man, like, I have to imagine if the Falcons have an average quarterback in this game, they win it. And Desmond Ridder, I would like to say the jury is still out. Like, if we're out here still giving Zach Wilson chances to go out here and be successful, I think we should be out here giving Desmond Ridder chances to go out here and be mediocre. Anyway, that's all I had to say about this. I saw, we talked about this on Sunday morning. The Jaguars are clearly the more talented football team overall. They have the run game and the pass game at their disposal when they operate correctly. Their defense went out here and showed why they're one of the better defenses in the NFL. When they went up against, like I said before, like an average to below average quarterback, they went out there and took care of business. That's an important aspect of being a team that supposedly is a front runner, despite what we've seen so far. My question is like, how many times can I, as a football fan, watch the Falcons defense play this fucking good and not say that the Falcons got a good defense for the first time in a long time? Maybe it's the opponents. Maybe it's the lack of injuries. Maybe it's just Jesse Bates. Only time will tell. That's all I got. That's what I got for the Snooze Fest. Let's go to Heartbreaker, shall we? Heartbreaker category. This one's one of my favorites. I think we all can agree. We love some good heartbreak. This one was really, I don't know why. Why did I put Buccaneers Saints in Heartbreaker? Oh, I know why. They were trying to play an injured quarterback. And they were calling, the Saints came into this game and essentially told you from the jump they would rather play hurt Derek Carr than let Jameis go out there and sling that thing. And to their credit, Jameis does come in later in this game in the fourth quarter and throws an interception within like 2 plays of being into the game. But I will say this, it is the closest deep ball that was thrown in the entirety of this football game. Because Derek Carr, with the way his shoulder got injured versus the Packers, that ended up with him like actually being removed from the game, he must have lost his like he doesn't have a good read on his touch. If you came out and told me that his entire shoulder was numb, I would believe you, because the way he was throwing the ball deeper down the field showed he legitimately couldn't judge his own power, which he's been himself for like quite a long time. I think Derek Carr is older than me, and I'm 30 years old. He's been playing quarterback for a really long time, and he has been working on honing his ability to throw the ball down the field. And the only way I can imagine that he wouldn't be able to judge his own power on a deep ball is if he can't feel the arm that he's throwing with, which would make sense for a guy whose shoulder was so bad that he got removed from the game last week, right? And it gets worse before it gets better. Anyway, the Saints came out here. The first play of the game featured quarterback Taysom Hill, doing his thing. He threw an out route for what was like a 9-yard gain, and then 2 plays later he came back in, kind of did some option reads, or really did some RPO, not option read. Did some RPO stuff, and it just, it didn't get those 67-yard touchdowns that we're accustomed to seeing from tight end Taysom Hill. I will point this out. This was the most, I've never seen so many different ways for you to cook up a way for a quarterback to not have to throw the ball further than 5 yards. I would say overall in this game, Derek Carr threw the ball further widthwise of the field than he did down the field vertically, right? There was short curls, there were swing routes from running backs. By the way, this is Alvin Kamara's first game back, and he spent most of it catching checkdowns. He had 13 catches in this game. He had Texas routes. He had just pure short curls over. He had swing routes out to the left-hand side off of motion. He had, they had wide receivers running 2-yard curl downs. It was insane, everything that they were doing to accommodate Derek Carr instead of just using their backup quarterback. And when you're the New Orleans Saints, what are we playing here for? Like, I get it. Are you really playing for the win if you believe that hurt Derek Carr is better than healthy Jameis Winston? I don't know, man. Like, the back end of that game versus the Packers, I get it. The Saints offense was going up against a ridiculously talented Packers defense, and they couldn't get anything done, to the point where, like, you could argue that there's a point to be made about Jameis being the reason that they lost that game. I don't think that's what happened, because the Saints offense has been asleep most of the season. So what is the point? The Bucs don't score until halfway through the second quarter, but it really felt like vast majority of this game, they were the most lively of the two offenses. And that has to do with something that we got to admit, guys. We personally got to look inside and admit. Their plan seemed relatively simple to mitigate the pass rush for the Saints up front. This is the Buccaneers. Their plan seemed like pretty simple. They ran as many multi-front wide receivers. Like, they had, I would say vast majority of the game, they spent with 4 wide receivers on the field, and that's wild to think about because Mike Evans left, I think, like halfway through the second quarter with an injury or something like that. Chris Godwin had one hell of a game. They were running 4 or 5 wide receiver sets, right? Like 5 empty, all that kind of stuff like that. And they were just trying to spread out the secondary for the Saints because they thought, and their plan was, well, if they can get here in 3 seconds, one of y'all is going to get open in 3 seconds. It just comes down to whether or not Baker Mayfield can figure out which one of the 4 of y'all is open, right? And at some points, he could not figure it out. But vast majority of this game, he could. They were right. They were right about how to attack the Saints defense, and I'm sure other people are going to take notes of it because there are teams that have more talent on offense than the Buccaneers do, and they can utilize their game plan versus the Saints, especially considering, like, this is a team that is a divisional opponent, right? Like, this is a divisional opponent, and they were able to pull off, like, a pretty dominant win. And that's saying a lot, especially when it comes to divisional stuff. They had a 17-play drive. This is the touchdown drive that they had to start off the game in the second quarter. 17 plays, and it took almost 9 minutes off the clock. 8 minutes and 51 seconds. Absolute living fucking nightmare if you're a defensive lineman, right? 9 minutes on the field trying to figure out how to chase down Baker Mayfield. Honestly, Baker is back in the kitchen, y'all. We got to be honest about that. And that's tough. I know that's tough for a lot of you guys because a good chunk of you guys have made hay and clout on the internet of just shitting on Baker Mayfield. Now, my point to you is He's probably going to give you a reason to a little bit later on this season. But right now, Baker is a part of the path to victory. And with the way the NFC South is, that path may take them all the way to the postseason. We'll see. But yeah, that's pretty much it, man. There's a lot of talent. I think we're all starting to remember that when Tom Brady was on the Buccaneers, they had a lot of talented players, and they got super lucky in the draft, like Antoine Winfield stepping in and becoming like a top 15, top 10 safety in the NFL almost instantaneously. Kind of insane. Carlton Davis already being there. They lost Mike Edwards in free agency. He plays for the Chiefs, if I'm not mistaken now. And, I mean, like Shaq Barrett plus Devin White plus Tryon and a bunch of other guys as well, man. Like, they just keep... their drafting is kind of amazing. Their drafting is like Steeler-level type stuff. But, you know, we'll see how it shakes out. Right now, they're looking pretty good. Weird shit that happened in this game. Baker throws a bad pick on a streak route. He throws it to the inside, even though his wide receiver has outside leverage or whatever. And he throws it like directly to the defensive back. He gets tagged down at like the 2-yard line because the guy catches it and falls down or whatever. And then 2 plays later, they're scoring a touchdown. So what happened was they tag him down at like the 2-yard line. The Saints are lining up inside their own end zone. They fullback dive it. Antoine Winfield punches out the ball for a fumble. They recover it, and then immediately Baker Mayfield goes for the end zone, and they score 2 plays later after throwing an interception. Kind of wild. That usually doesn't happen that way. But yeah, that was the kind of day it was. Putting a bad name on fullbacks. That's kind of sad. Other games that are... Oh, hold on a second. Damn. You got somebody in the chat popping up. Ooh. This is a fantasy football question. I'm not going to lie. You know what? I'll do it. Noah Sion says 16-team full PPR. I have Richardson, A-Chain, Jacobs, Adams, Keenan, Laporta, and London. You know, the London thing's probably not going to work out too well for you. But, you know, time will tell. Only time will tell. Especially if they get another quarterback in the mix there. Because if I'm not mistaken, Mike White's there. Might be. Look, everybody loves Mike White. Let's be real. Everybody does. Other heartbreaker games. This one was a heartbreaker because the score is really deceptive on this one. The Packers were never close in this game. I want that to be understood, like, instantaneously. There was no point where you could, as a viewer, feel like the Packers were competing with the Lions. And that's the heartbreaking part about it. Because it's basically back-to-back. Like, look, let's be real. The 1-point loss... Sorry, let me backtrack it, right? The epic comeback in week 1. The 1-point loss to the Falcons. The... comeback versus the Saints, and now losing on Thursday Night Football by 14 to the Detroit Lions in a divisional game, right? Erratic, yet consistently erratic in the same exact ways, right? The erratic behavior, he's 4-0, Noah says. Makes sense. Like I said before, drafting A-Chain was, I did it purely out of the fact that I covered him when he was in high school, and I knew he was going to be pretty good in the NFL because speed kills, and if there's one thing that Devon has, it is plenty of speed. So I'm glad that it's panning out for him. I watched that Bills-Dolphins game, and it was still blowing my mind. I was like, that's him! That's him! That's the kid! That's the kid. Anyway, going back to Lions-Packers, I don't know why I'm trying to force people to listen to me talk about this game that was not fun. But yeah, the Packers seem like they got a problem. They seem like they got a guy who's talented in short spurts, which is going to be uber frustrating if you were a fan of the Green Bay Packers, I believe. For the most part, Jordan Love has shown that, like I said before, 2 quarters at a time, he might be a top 3 quarterback in the NFL for 2 quarters. Now, is that going to be enough to be successful in the long run? Who knows, especially considering... Once again, Jordan Love probably has the most difficult job in the NFL. He's trying to follow up 2 Hall of Famers who won Super Bowls for the Green Bay Packers. That's a tough way to go. There's a tough way to go. But yeah, man, that's how that game shook out. The Lions look like they are ready to kick ass. And what is it? Take ass and kick names? Yeah, that's pretty much what it is. They've been cooking all season, man, and it seems like adding Jameson Williams is only going to make them better. That's the wild part. That's what's on the verge. That's what's on the verge of happening. We are on the verge of witnessing a powerhouse Detroit Lions football team. I don't know how we got here. Actually, I do know how we got here. I've been watching them since they were like really, quote unquote, really bad, and seen them progressively get better. So it was pretty cool. The Broncos played the Bears. Another sad game for a multitude of reasons. I have notes on this one, and I wanted to point out how funny it was. So the Bears, currently 0-4, basically, unless they make NFL history, they will not be making the playoffs. They would be the second team ever in the history of the NFL to start the season 0-4 and make the playoffs. Don't worry, 0-3 is not much better, but it is a little bit better. Chase Claypool did not come to work for this game because he is away from the team, an interesting proposition. So the Bears lead this game 28-7 late in the third quarter. That's right. The Bears came out here. They were lighting it up. They've had their best offensive performance of the season. By the way, this is your sign to deprogram your brain to stop thinking when you see Denver Broncos thinking good defense. This is 2-3 weeks in a row, because if you count the Commanders game, they give up 30 in the Commanders game too. We gotta stop. I gotta move away from that. Me mentally, as a football fan, I gotta move away from that. They got other things going on. I know they had a bunch of injuries in that Dolphins game, and then it went completely sideways for them or whatever. But yeah, man, like I gotta stop associating Denver Broncos with good defense. It's over. I don't know how we got here so quickly, but we are here. They do have one of the few lockdown corners in the NFL in Patrick Surtain. The Bears led 28-7 late in the third quarter of this game. They were killing it, which is probably really bad for Chase Claypool sitting at home talking about how they're not utilizing him correctly. But yeah, Justin Fields finally went out there, did his thing. The Broncos on their first drive scored a touchdown, and then they decided to take a little break. They decided to take a little breaky break for 3 quarters. So they did not score until the third quarter. Sorry, my bad. Noah Sycon in the chat asked, how do I feel about Sam Laporta? I find it funny that it took for the Lions to get Sam Laporta for them to be like, they got a lot of small guys outside of these offensive linemen. What if we put one of those big guys in front of him? Because that's basically what Sam Laporta's been doing all season. He's been lining up as a wide receiver and just destroying cornerbacks. It's pretty funny to me, honestly. I like to see it a lot. It's also impressive that they were able to draft somebody a year removed from trading TJ Hawkinson away. So, and once again, one of those rare examples of where like both teams seem to be doing well after the trade, whereas we have the Vikings and the Jets, where like Dalvin Cook signs with the Jets and the Vikings don't have Dalvin Cook anymore and they're having a bad time. Both of them are having a bad time. Bad time all the time. But yeah, that is oh yeah, no doubt, Noah. If you got any football questions, I'd be more than happy to talk about that as well. I'm not really like a fantasy guy. I play fantasy way too much, but I'm not like a fantasy football guy. But yeah, no doubt. Where were we at? Oh, we were talking about the Broncos and how they broke the hearts of the Chicago Bears. So this is how it sorts out. This is how it all shakes out when it's all said and done. Like I said before, the Broncos scored a touchdown in their first drive of the game. So the first 15 plays, money. First 15 plays, absolute money. And then all the plays following that, not so good. Not so good. They didn't have a drive that lasted longer than 6 plays until they got to the third quarter. So, like I said, they took a little break. I think there was like 4 or 5 drives on offense in between the first drive that they had and then the next drive that they had that was longer than 6 plays. They had the best offensive performance they had all season. After they started this 7-play drive in the third quarter. It was touchdown, field goal. The field goal was to win it because naturally when bad things happen to the defense, they have to happen to the offense because in between the two Denver Broncos touchdowns. So there's the Broncos touchdown that I think was like a 7-play drive. And then the second drive of the Bears, right? The Bears go out there, they go play offense. A 17-yard sack fumble gets returned for a touchdown, 14 points. The next drive from the Denver Broncos, touchdown on the board. Tough times, ladies and gentlemen. You know what I mean? Tough times for, well, Justin Fields. I was going to say Sierra's husband, but he kind of got bailed out by the defense, let's be real. So they get 3 drives, they score 2 touchdowns and a field goal, and they get a touchdown on defense. So they almost instantaneously wipe away the best offensive performance of the Bears' entire season, which has you, as a Bears fan, possibly believing in the fact that there is a devil. You have to believe that there is a devil in some way, shape, or form after seeing something like that. And obviously the devil is a Packers fan. My bad. We got another question in here. Noah, interesting. So Noah apparently is a Raiders fan. Are you an Oakland Raiders fan or a Las Vegas Raiders fan? Do you buy any new gear if you were an Oakland person? We'll talk about the Raiders here in a second because I think they're in the next category of games, in the oh my category, because I actually enjoyed watching them play football this week. We'll talk about that in a second. Don't get too ahead of yourself. Anyway, what were we saying? We're talking football. The Bears win 31-28. Tough look. The Bears spiraling, have to be. I don't think I've seen a heartbreak game like this in quite some time, my friends. The 28 points on offense was a season high for the Chicago Bears, and it's the best they looked all season, and it wasn't enough. By the way, the Broncos scored over 20 points and won the game. What do you know? So it's one of two things that happen. You score over 20 points, you're the Broncos. You either lose by 50 or you win by 3. Interesting results. It may be worth it because under 20 is an L every single time. 50-50 is better than 0. But yeah, weird stuff. The weird stuff is the entire second half. The entire second half of this game. So yeah, moving on. Let's talk about the Rams and the Colts. 29-23. Actually, hold on. I'm supposed to be going by the categories. My bad, guys. Let's go to the oh my category. We've had some interesting games that were over the top, but I'll answer Noah's question real quick. My bad. Interesting. So Noah, I have to wonder, have you bought any Las Vegas gear? Not that there's a difference, because there's one thing about Al Davis. He was very efficient in terms of how the team should be run, and most of it is making sure that you never change the uniforms whatsoever, so you keep making money off the exact same clothing without having to invest in different uniforms. So the Raiders so far, obviously, like I've been saying it on this podcast. I said it during the preseason. I said it the first couple of weeks of the season as well. They lost to the Steelers. It was pretty disappointing. I've been saying that if I could have picked an extra team when I asked what teams are going to go winless this season, I would have put the Raiders on there. So, look, man, I don't know why so many people are up in arms about Josh McDaniels, but me personally don't care. Right? He seems like the kind of guy. I say he's better than Matt Patricia because it was very clear that Matt Patricia likes to pretend that he's the smart guy, and it was really weird for a guy who, like, you know, you spend all this time hearing about how he's like a rocket scientist, that he could have been a rocket scientist, and all this kind of stuff like that, and you find out that he's like a dude that's trying to correct people's posture in media sessions because he doesn't want to talk about how he sucked as a coach. Anyway, no, because there's nobody on the Raiders who are loyal. I wonder what you mean by that. I would love an explanation for what you mean by loyal, because I'm sure if the players got to choose, they would choose to stay with the Raiders. If I got a chance to pick, I would have picked staying in Vegas if I was a football player, especially if I was getting paid money. I don't know, what are taxes? Wait, how bad are taxes if you're a Raider player? If you're a Raider. I'm in Texas, so like they make it seem like taxes are non-existent here, essentially, which is why people like to come here for other weird reasons as well. But yeah, man, I think the Raiders are pretty bad. overall. They've had some moments this season where they looked pretty impressive. Not gonna lie, that game versus the Steelers was probably a lot closer than the Steelers would have liked for the most part, but it did give them some kind of hope to be successful, but whatever. Aiden O'Connell actually looked really good in that game versus the Chargers, and no offense to Jimmy G, I'm pretty sure he lost his job. Because if it wasn't for Khalil Mack having 6 sacks and 3 forced fumbles and recovering 2 of them, the Raiders would have been in that game. And I know that sounds absurd saying that out loud, but not fumbling the ball is something that you can control as a quarterback, right? Not getting sacked, something you can probably control as well too. But spatial awareness is important. It's difficult to be able to see things that are behind you when you have a helmet on. But yeah, let's go to the oh my category up top, and then we'll talk about Raiders Chargers a little bit later on. So, off the top, the Bills played the Dolphins. I don't know if y'all heard about this or not. It was supposed to be the match of the century. It actually was a lot of fun watching the Bills take on the Dolphins. It was probably the most fun I had watching a football game this entire weekend. This shook out like I said it was going to on Sunday. It was an offensive back and forth, and it was about who was going to blink first, right? The first 6 possessions of this game saw 5 touchdowns and a punt. So that punt's really important. That punt is really important because it was the start of the end for the Dolphins. So they punt, they get a stop on defense, then the offense comes back out and Tua fumbles, and it's recovered, or Raheem Mostert fumbles, and it's recovered by the Bills, and it's basically an avalanche from that point on about how the Bills just kind of ran away with it. It was kind of brutal to watch because you could feel that's exactly how this game was going to go. They had a punt and a fumble on back-to-back drives, and it basically took them out of the game. So, yeah, they were down by 2 touchdowns after both of those drives ended, and the 4 drives after the punt, they were only able to gain a combined 35 yards. One might imagine, as you would think, not great for your chances of being able to score. We can only get 35 yards up the field. I'm not a big proponent of talking about like the value of yards and stuff like that. Like, I actually think when you're determining the number 1 defense in the NFL that you should not be including yards surrendered, because it's not like a real value thing. Like, you can give up 1,000 yards and 0 points in a single game. At halftime, the score of this game was 31-14. Cater Kahoo, guy we talked about in preseason about dudes that you should root for. I need you to root for him harder than you ever have before, ladies and gentlemen, because he was the mark for this game. And like I said earlier, when we're talking about streaks, peaks, and ditches, Stephon Diggs had 120 plus yards and 3 touchdowns. Tough. Cater Kahoo, by the way, Xavier Howard was there. They just didn't allow him to get any reps versus Stephon Diggs, and it showed. The only negative thing that you can take away from this game for the Bills was, hands down, obviously, Tre'Davious White tearing his Achilles. Absolute nightmare, right? Their secondary was at full strength out there, playing full tilt. They actually didn't have Micah Hyde, or they didn't have Jordan Poyer, and they still looked amazing. They forced multiple turnovers. I think they had like 2 interceptions and a fumble recovery. There you go. Final score in this one, I think it was like 41-20, right? You can basically take those 3 touchdowns, add it to their score. They have 48-20 added to their score, and there you go. But yeah, weird shit that happened in this game. Dawson Knox stiff-armed, I want to say it was Cater Kahoo, into oblivion, and then crawled over the top of him for a first down. It looked pretty cool. I'm a big proponent of stiff arms. I don't really support offense like that because offense has so many rules in favor of it. It's hard to sit here and be like, oh yeah, y'all, like, oh, they look so good. And it's like, they got a lot of people helping them look good. Raheem Mostert mossed the shit out of Micah Hyde to the point where I thought maybe, just maybe, his balls hit over the top of Micah Hyde's helmet. So, yeah, that was pretty sick. Josh Allen was doing the thing where he was playing like a quarterback instead of a tight end. That was pretty cool. That was some weird shit because last week he played like a tight end. Anyway, moving on is what I'll say. Oh my category continues. Titans 27, Bengals 3. So this game starts off pretty heated in the trenches. There's at one point where Arden Key literally grabs the throat of Alex Kappa, one of the offensive linemen for the Bengals. The Bengals' first 15 plays had them zooming down the field, and then they got stuffed like kind of around the 5-yard line. They got forced to take a field goal. That field goal they took on the first drive of the game will be the only points they score in this game. The first big strike by either of the teams, because it felt like for a second there, one, didn't look like Joe Burrow was as hampered as he had been in weeks past or whatever, but the first big strike of the game that kind of felt like it tilted the fortunes for either one of these teams, because both of these teams are in turmoil to a certain degree, right? The Titans are in contention for winning the AFC South, and the Bengals are a Super Bowl contender by many people's metrics, and they've not looked like that at all at pretty much any point so far this season. So they have high expectations. They're getting low results. The first big strike of this game was a Al Shazier fumble that was forced off Joe Burrow trying to throw the ball forward, and they wiped that away because Joe Burrow did start the motion of moving the ball forward as Al Shazier was hitting him, so it just turned out to be an incomplete pass. But it was definitely one of those like, oh, I get what the Titans are doing. And then they just kept doing it the entire game. They literally sent like 6-man pressure the entirety of this game, and Joe Burrow couldn't get the ball out fast enough. Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that they didn't have a couple of big plays overall, but the fact of the matter is that they took advantage of the offensive line that people kind of like, just because they're moving the ball up and down the field, people like to act like the offensive line's gotten like so much better. They can't block 6 people, right? They were already really struggling to block 4 up front, especially with Jeffrey Simmons. They got to Joe Burrow a couple of times up front, and they took him down a bunch of times or whatever. But for the most part, man, the Titans' plan was send pressure, play man-to-man defense for as long as we possibly can against these wide receivers, and hope that Joe Burrow can't figure out who's open. And it worked vast majority of the game. And when I say vast majority, I mean the entire game. It worked the entire game. And it is the blueprint. Congratulations to the Cincinnati Bengals for letting everybody know how to cook them. I have a strange feeling that will not be changing at all. While the Titans were pass heavy, they did it on offense. They passed the ball a bunch in this game, and probably was like some of the best looking passing they've had all season, which is kind of sad to say, but it's true. Last week they did play the number 1 defense in the NFL, but yeah, they passed the ball under the guys that they were running it. Like, there was a lot of play action to Derrick Henry, and it was a real legitimate question of like, hey man, which one of these handoffs is going to Derrick Henry and which one is not, because they need, when it comes to stopping Derrick Henry, you need to know as much information up front as soon as possible for your own safety. And speaking of safety, that the reason they utilize the play action against the Bengals have this thing, and a couple of other teams do this too. Their way of stopping really dynamic running backs is sending defensive backs off the backside of what appear to be run plays. So like the defensive back is making a read of whether or not the play is a run or a pass, and if it's a run, they're shooting the backside, kind of like what defensive ends do if you're the right defensive end and the play is going to the right hand side on the offensive right, and you're on the defensive right, they're polar opposites, right, because they face each other way. If they're going offensive right, your job is to run to the back of the left tackle and slide your way down to make sure that the running back cannot cut back on the play and feed the running back to the linebackers and the other defensive linemen that are on that play. Because if there's no contain, they're able to break backwards and be able to run free, which actually happened to the Bengals in this one on a Tajay Spears play, which I'm sure a bunch of people have seen. If you have not, you should definitely go check it out. It was kind of crazy. But the Bengals, instead of using a defensive lineman, they send another defensive lineman, but that D lineman's job is to continue pursuit on the run play, whereas the edge is being set by the defensive back, and he shoots into the backfield. And his job, a lot of times, if you're familiar with when the Titans played the Bengals multiple times in the last couple of years, they used Eli Apple for this job, and it changed up a little bit because Eli Apple's no longer on the team. He's with the Dolphins, in case you didn't know. And They were not able to do it as effectively because the Titans were way more deceptive about when they were passing and when they were running. So they were able to get some backside plays with no backside defender on it, and Derrick Henry took advantage of it because that's just what he does. He broke like he had a touchdown where he broke literally one tackle and just took off from everybody else, and it looked like it does every single time Derrick Henry gets into open space. Nobody can stop him. But yeah, that was a big part of why the Titans were successful overall. They were legitimately, despite what people will say about how play action doesn't work, once again, the nerds tell you that play action doesn't work. It does work when you have a dynamic of enough running back to get people to sell out on the run when there's even an inkling that they could be touching the ball. And that's what they did. They basically they spent the whole game burning the Bengals on pass run reads. And it was, not great. Not great for the Bengalis up front. Weird stuff. The refs called a ghost penalty on Ronald McCreary, the slot cornerback for the Titans. And one of them was standing right in front of Danico Autry when he grabbed Alex Cappa by the throat. And they just threw a flag on McCreary. They ran it back on the replay, and McCreary was within 2 yards of the line of scrimmage, which, if you're unfamiliar, means that he can, in fact, grab the wide receiver, and he hadn't even actually grabbed the wide receiver. They just called a ghost penalty for no reason, instead of calling a personal foul penalty. It was really weird. Other stuff in the oh my category, the Ravens played the Browns. DTR, Dorian Thompson-Robinson, who does make YouTube videos, made a path to the draft video on his way to the draft and stuff like that. It was cool. I personally watched a bunch. I was invested in him. He played really well during the preseason. He did not play well at all in this game. The rookie QB versus the Ravens defense, and they only lost by 25. I'll point this out. The Browns defense did their thing. The Browns offense gave the Ravens 3 extra possessions because they threw 3 interceptions throughout the course of this game. And they got the ball back in Browns territory every single time that they threw an interception. So that was a little tough. That's pretty much the only reason the Ravens were able to score in this game, which I don't think a lot of people were talking about. More people were caught up in the fact that for the first time ever, Lamar Jackson had 2 passing touchdowns and 2 rushing touchdowns. But for the most part, the offense had moments where it looked good, but once they got into that red zone, it was bad times at the Baltimore Corral. The cool part is that the rushing game is playing such a big role for the Ravens up front. They are still able to figure out a way to work without having J.K. Dobbins. They're using a combination of Justice Hill, Melvin Gordon, and Gus Edwards, plus Lamar Jackson, plus some end-around stuff from Zay Flowers or whatever. And they got 131 rushing yards in this one and a rushing touchdown, if I'm not mistaken. But for the most part, this was actually really cool to see them blended almost perfectly with the passing game. Zay Jones, extra running back, right? Extra running back in terms of how he plays the ball. The final drive of the second half of this game was basically 3 plays. It was Lamar Jackson rolls out to the right-hand side, defensive lineman closing in on Lamar Jackson. Zay Jones cuts underneath his defensive back, motions over, and toe taps 45 yards down the field. And then the next play, Mark Andrews over the shoulder. It was a back pylon throw over 2 defensive backs, and he mosses both of them for the touchdown to end the half. Crazy stuff. Weird shit that happened in this game. Patrick Queen hit DTR so hard they probably should have called the cops. The Browns ended up in a 4th and 38 because of a DTR scramble where he ran back to inside the Browns' 5-yard line and then tried to throw the ball down the field as Jadeveon Clowney was closing in on him. By the way, Jadeveon Clowney using deceptive numbers to fuck with you. His number is 24, playing defensive end, playing outside linebacker, playing edge. That's what he plays, edge. But yeah, no, Patrick Queen, DTR tries to throw the ball disappears. Ball magically disappears. We got another chat right here, man. We doing good today. 804 POSS says the 49ers going to smash the Cowboys. That I can't believe. Have you seen So my friend, he may or may not partake in some gambling habits, but he said the line's looking kind of funny right now. Interesting. interesting. But yeah, I mean, obviously the 49ers would have to be the favorite in that one overall. There's no question about it whatsoever. But we'll talk about that on Thursday. Wednesday. No. Yeah, Thursday. No, Friday. I don't know why I keep mixing up my days when I do this show. I do this show, and I keep forgetting. But yeah, DTR scrambled. He tried to throw the ball, and the ball disappeared, a.k.a. it fell out of his hands, and it almost got recovered by Jadeveon Clowney. Luckily, he dove on it, and they had to punt from inside their own end zone after starting at their own 40-yard line. They were punting from inside their own end zone. Amari Cooper doesn't catch a pass until 7:31 in the third quarter of this game. 7:31. Long time. Long time without getting the ball to your number one wide receiver. I cannot imagine how much Amari Cooper hates the fact that he got traded to the Browns. Things have gone completely sideways since he got traded. And he's like a really good wide receiver, too. That's the worst part about it. The 49ers played the Cardinals. The 49ers played a football game, and the Cardinals showed up. Shout out to them for doing that. The 49ers, they were like, what way can we beat the Cardinals? So they shut down the Cardinals' run game, which affected their pass game because it wasn't as creative when there's no third of the run with James Conner. There was multiple times where James Conner touched the ball and got sacked in the backfield for 4-yard losses. That happens. It happens. James Conner's had a great season so far. He's going up against the number 1/number 2 defense in the NFL. You tell me, people in the comments, who's the number 1 defense in the NFL, the 49ers or the Browns? That's what it really comes down to. Who do you think? But yeah, they took away the run game for the Cardinals and forced Josh Dobbs to beat them, which really good game plan. Really good game plan. He's played really well to start this season. As a matter of fact, let's be real, Josh Dobbs has played significantly better than Deshaun Watson. And Deshaun Watson allegedly has a better run game than Josh Dobbs. But higher level of productivity from Josh Dobbs. One, because he's willing to throw the ball down the field. Two, you could argue he maybe does have better wide receivers. Who knows? But yeah, 35-16 final score on this one. This was pretty cut and dry, especially considering Christian McCaffrey put the whole team on his back, and then the defense did their thing. Yeah, it was. I think Christian McCaffrey had 3 touchdowns before halftime, and the Cardinals tried to come back in this game, but the 49ers did that thing where they're just better, and they dominated them in this one. So yeah. No weird stuff, just normal 49er stuff in this game. Chargers, Raiders. This game was a ton of fun. I also wrote down a bunch of notes, so we're going to go through those on this one. This is my last oh my in the category or whatever, and then we're moving on to the last couple games in the this is why we're here category, and we're done. The Chargers have made it. The Chargers started off this game. It was pretty wild. They started off this game establishing the run. The LA Chargers established the run to start this game. Kind of wild. Joshua Kelly was out there doing his thing. And then they added in, Darius Davis, who, if you're not familiar with this game, don't worry. The last time you saw him probably was when TCU was in the college football playoff. He was on that TCU team a year ago, and he's a wide receiver technically, but they used him as a running back in this game. He actually did pretty well. Might be worth a pickup, especially if Austin Eckler's going to be out for a prolonged period of time. Who knows? Anyway, they established the run. It worked really well versus the Raiders. Their defense, their pass rush was pretty bad in the first half of this one. They got 1 sack, but for the most part, it took them. The 1 sack that they got was a hustle sack off 7 seconds being in the pocket because nobody was able to get open, which is a good thing. The Raiders, Trayvon Moreg, who is a safety, I was not familiar with this game. He dropped an interception in the first half of this game. And he had the best excuse possible. His thumb is apparently broken, and he was out there playing with the cast. And he had the ball initially in his hand, but then he fell and hit the ground. 804 in the chat says Chargers need to fire their head coach, Brandon Staley, if he doesn't win at least 2 playoff games. So me personally, this is probably some of the biggest improvement that the Chargers have made as a team overall in terms of being relevant to me. A lot of what the Chargers did before was rely on their ridiculously talented Hall of Famers in Phillip Rivers and LaDainian Tomlinson and Antonio Gates. It never really felt like they developed and got better as a team overall. This, with Brandon Staley, one, feels like they've got a different approach to playing football. Obviously, a lot of that has to do with the fact that Justin Herbert is a franchise quarterback. They've drafted really well, like drafting Mike Williams out of Western Michigan, huge get up front. Obviously, Keenan Allen, they didn't draft him. He's just really good at football. They've drafted so many other really good players up front. Derwin James was one of their draft picks. Asante Samuels Jr., like that, like they have clearly taken the Chargers to a place that they have not been before. And if it comes down to the fact, like there hasn't been a time in Brandon Staley's tenure where you're just like, this team is not good enough to win this game. They've been in every game that they've played for the past, 3 years for the most part. And not many teams in the NFL can say that. I don't think that warrants a firing. I totally understand the comeback loss and the comeback win in the playoffs. That's brutal. You're never going to get away from that. You're never going to escape that for the most part, man. Like, you're never going to live that down unless you go out there and get a win. You're right. He does have to continue to push the team forward. They've already become a team that stops losing one possession games in a season. They flipped that from last season. Now they're getting better at actually just outright winning games. For instance, last year when they didn't have Austin Eckler, their run game was non-existent. This year they haven't had Austin Eckler outside of the first week of the season, and they're still finding ways to make their run game. Does the coach or the GM / scouting department get credit for draft picks? So, one, that's a great question. Two, the response is, technically, it varies from team to team, right? So, case in point, when Mike Mayock went from being at NFL Network to the GM for the Las Vegas Raiders, I think he was the Vegas Raiders' first GM, he and John Gruden, who had more years on his contract and was making more money, it was like a 50-50 thing with those two, which is not great because, like, your head coach of your football team doesn't have the time to dedicate to scouting, right? Like across the board. I always assume, I don't think there's any team that doesn't take the input of their coach when it comes to draft picks, right? I don't think there's any team in the NFL that doesn't have say or input or an opinion from the coaching staff overall, and whether it be in terms of like the kind of player they're looking for or like actually watching film of that player. There's a reason that every head coach goes to the combine, right? It's so that they can formulate those opinions. Now, the scouts may have detailed opinions of how these players have progressed throughout the course of their college careers, and that's a big part of understanding that's a big part of judging potential, right? A big part of figuring out how to find future superstars is looking at what they're like. Can they potentially get better, or are you dealing with where you talk about guys who you talk about quarterbacks at USC or quarterbacks at Ohio State or defensive play? Well, I wouldn't even say defensive players out of Alabama, but like certain defensive players out of Alabama, right? Have those guys peaked in college, right? Or are they just scratching the surface physically of what they can do eventually as a dominant football player overall, right? It's trying to figure out the difference between the Johnny Manziels of the world and the Josh Allens of the world, right? Some of those other factors involved in terms of like Johnny not wanting to work hard and being very open about not wanting to work hard, but also like Johnny never got any better when he got into the NFL. He was still the same quarterback that he was in college, whereas like Josh got to the NFL and he clearly got better year by year, and you could even argue game by game in the NFL, and that kind of development just doesn't happen. I give credit to both groups of people, mainly because when they fire people, they usually firing both of them for the most part. You know what I mean? Especially if they came in together, they firing both of them when it comes time to fire them. So you got to give them both credit when things go right and when things go wrong. But yeah, it depends team to team, right? Going back to what I was talking about before with the Chargers and the Raiders. Speaking of team to team, the Trayvon Moehrig, one of their safeties, he has a broken thumb, tried to catch an interception and dropped it, and then he gets redemption later on in the game. He actually catches a more difficult pass that was like flying a lot harder at the defensive or at the wide receiver and intercepts that with his broken hand. So I thought that was pretty cool. Jeffrey Tillery hits Justin Herbert a little bit late, and the Raiders are down 10-7 at this point in the second quarter. And you could have sworn, based off the response on the internet and in the game, that Jeffrey Tillery took out a gun and shot Justin Herbert in both of his kneecaps. Herbert was running outside of the pocket. He had been doing that a vast majority of the game, by the way. This is probably the most dual-thready that I've ever seen Justin Herbert look. But Herbert was running outside the pocket. He had taken one step out of bounds. Like, he literally, 1 foot had touched out of bounds, which is the trigger for the penalty. I get the penalty. They ejected Jeffrey Tillery from the game. If Herbert is stronger, because everybody else on the field is required to be stronger and faster, whereas, like, quarterbacks are not because of reasons, right? They're trying to convince you that quarterbacks having muscle affects their ability to throw a football, which doesn't make any logical sense. He's gaining yards up the field in the process of this run that he's going on. And also, like, my fifth point is, like, flat out, we hold defensive players to a significantly higher standard than we hold any offensive player. I don't think offensive players could function if they got held to the standard that defensive players are held to. Like, not being able to lead with your head when you are making contact with somebody would eliminate, like, 90% of running backs in the NFL in terms of their ability to play the sport. He's ejected from the game, and 2 plays later, the Chargers score. This is off of a drive where Aiden O'Connell had fumbled, so it was a drive off of a turnover, so it was an extra drive essentially, and the ball is recovered. So like, it was one of those examples of like when it rains it pours. I thought it was bullshit. I think it's kind of whack. Like, I hate the hand holding that quarterbacks get in the NFL. And I get it. You know, Tom Brady tore his knee up that one time. He was throwing the ball forward and the defensive lineman fell into his kneecap, right? And destroyed all of his stuff. And there's no telling what world we would have lived in if Tom Brady hadn't come back and been the guy that he became, right? But the fact of the matter is, this happened like multiple times throughout the course of the weekend, and there was only one time where I really felt like it was a dirty play. I will say this, like, I get why the teams were fighting and stuff like that, but I also don't get why you're trying to act like he's a bad person for playing defense. Because if Justin Herbert like fakes like he's going to run out of bounds and then turns up field and Jeffrey Tillery didn't hit him, you know what I mean? Then all of a sudden Jeffrey Tillery's playing defense, like playing lazy on defense. So which one is it, right? They expect defensive players to be able to literally stop as if the concepts of inertia and momentum do not exist within a vacuum, right? And offensive players get to kind of do whatever they want on the field. They're more important, they're more valued, and they're treated better. But yeah, no, that was the tough one. By the way, like I said before, when Noah Sycon was in the chat, Aiden O'Connell, I thoroughly believe he's stolen Jimmy G's job. So he got sacked a bunch in this game. He fumbled 3 different times. But outside of those really bad plays, I saw some good stuff. And he, like, you know, he's a young quarterback. He's just drafted. And the Raiders season is kind of going downhill really fast. And I'm assuming that Jimmy G is going to be out for quite some time, or at least a week. He is concussed. He's in the concussion protocol. And nobody saw when the concussion occurred, which is even more suspicious for a multitude of reasons. But yeah, he was in the concussion protocol. Nobody saw when it happened. That does not mean that he's not concussed, because that's not how concussions work, right? Concussions can happen at any given time, at any given point. Got 804 chiming in again. Jimmy G made of glass. As a 49er fan, he was good before the knee injury. Thankful he kept us relevant. See, that's the kind of appreciation I like to see, man. You know what I mean? Like Jimmy, like a lot of people, you know, they want to talk about how Jimmy G is trash, when in actuality, Jimmy G was above average. And there are like most teams in the NFL that would kill to have an above average quarterback on their team. Luckily for them, when you give above average to Kyle Shanahan, he goes to the Super Bowl. So, that being said, yeah, I thought it was really weird. The biggest thing was, I was on a roller coaster in terms of opinions about Aiden O'Connell throughout the course of this game. At first, I was like, oh man, this kid's like going out here kind of slinging it. He was like super confident. He kind of got like, you know, dinged up a little bit by the defensive line for the Chargers, which, by the way, obviously the solution has been this whole time that Khalil Mack, Joey Bosa has been getting in the way. Best game for Khalil Mack's career ever. Joey Bosa sits out this game. Best game in Khalil Mack's entire illustrious career ever, and one of the greatest games in the history of pass rushes, right? I think they said something like only 4 other pass rushers have ever had a game where they've had 5 sacks in it. Anyway, back to Aiden O'Connell and how I thought he was good, and then I was like, he's just checking it down every single time. And then I checked the stats, and I was like, Josh Jacobs only has 8 catches in this game, and my brain mentally could not perceive that Josh Jacobs had only touched the ball 8 times off of a throw from Aiden O'Connell, because it felt like every other play was going to him. And he was, I mean, to his credit, Josh Jacobs was open. He was getting yards. He was keeping the drives alive until Khalil Mack decided he was going to bull rush his right tackle into Aiden O'Connell's shoulder and then jack him for the ball. Davante Adams gets hurt early on in this game and then comes back. But I'd like to point out, when Davante Adams got hurt, the Raiders did what any team does. They started to rely on the least valuable person by salary on their team, and Josh Jacobs. Right? That's what you do. Like, when your team is trying to win a game, you go to the person that you paid the least on the offense to come and save you. It's almost like that person is kind of important or something. Who would have thought? Anyway, pay running backs. He eventually comes back. Josh Jacobs, Davante Adams, and Jacoby Myers kind of all get utilized throughout the course of this game to pull off this somewhat of a comeback. This drive also has shit hit the fan pretty quickly. The drive where Davante Adams goes out, he gets a forced fumble off of, like, the nastiest bull rush I've seen in the NFL this season, and it's 24-7 by the time halftime rolls around. Remember, the final score is 24-17. 24-17. Interesting, right? So, that being said, second half starts. The Raiders are out here doing their thing. The Raiders defense actually turns the fuck up on the Chargers. They start cooking. Those rushes that were coming up like a second or a second and a half too short to actually affect Justin Herbert, start flushing them out of the pocket. Start forcing third downs. Start forcing punts, because the Chargers didn't punt until like the third quarter or something in this game. It bought enough time for the offense to finally get it all together. And for them to finally score with 3:19 left in the fourth quarter. Now, stick with me on this one. They get Aiden O'Connell a chance on a game-winning drive after they get a stop after they score that touchdown, right? Khalil Mack swats down a pass on second down. Third down is incomplete. Aiden O'Connell throws a dime on 4th and 10 to Davante Adams for 19 yards. They get the ball inside the 10-yard line, and they are at the 4-yard line. And then Aiden O'Connell throws an interception. Asante Samuels Jr., I don't know if you guys know this or not, he's pretty good at football. And Aiden O'Connell throws an out route, and Asante Samuels Jr. runs the out route with the wide receiver and actually gets to the ball before him. This was a terrible game for the Chargers, because if they don't have 6 sacks and 4 turnovers, and you take the 24 points only the 24 points that they scored, they probably lose this game to the Raiders, guys. Like, if they don't get 6 sacks and 4 turnovers, they probably lose this game. Insane to think about. The Chargers ran the ball really well, which is really weird to see. And it also raised the question in my brain of why the Steelers couldn't run the ball versus the Raiders. Anyway, just want to point out, the Chargers' run game has gotten significantly better as the weeks have gone on. So they went from 61 yards rushing in week 2. They went to 30 yards in week 3, and then they rushed for 155 yards versus the Raiders. And they used a combination of Josh Kelly and Darius Davis, like I said before. Max Crosby, at one point, this is weird shit, like just the list of weird things that happened through this game. Max Crosby did the LeBron James celebration, but coming into the stadium, he wore like a Kobe shirt. I don't know if that matters or not. Anyway, it was weird. Khalil Mack had 6 fucking sacks in this game. I feel like we should be talking about that a lot more. And he had 2 forced fumbles. Recovered 1. The Raiders didn't convert a third down until there was 9 minutes left in the third quarter. Oh, Jacoby Myers got an offensive pass interference. Like, that's super rare in the NFL. But he pushed off one of the 3 defensive backs that was around him when Aiden O'Connell threw a dime to him, because he was able to moss all 3 of those DBs. The Raiders' comeback turned SoFi into a Raiders home game, which is wild to say, because the Raiders, that's one of the few times they get to see them play or whatever. But yeah, the Raiders fans were there. They were loud. They were violent towards each other and towards Chargers fans. By the way, one of the most insulting, like easily lowest of the low moments for Raiders, the team and the fan base. The fight that's circulating, not the one with the hot ladies. That one was really weird. Like, they were yelling at each other, and then just one of them started swinging, and the one lady who was not swinging back must have been so drunk that she could not have felt the punches that were coming from that other lady. Somebody hopped in, started throwing punches too. Usually, it's the cowardly stuff, like the second person that comes in, holds them in place, and then punches them in the face kind of stuff. The guy that she was with, he puts his Raiders jacket on, and he's kind of like laughing while his girlfriend / this woman that he went to this game with is getting punched in the face and doesn't feel it. But the other fight that I'm actually talking about is the one where the drunk Raiders fan, he's like yelling back and forth with the Chargers fan. The Chargers fan is watching the game standing up. The Raiders fan walks towards him, and the Chargers fan, with no hesitation whatsoever, no question whatsoever, takes his fist perfectly placed on his face, knocks the dude out. He gets back up. He's ready for round 2. He gets popped again. 2 for 2. Popped again. He's down. His shoe flies into the section next to him. Probably never to be seen again. Right? He gets up again, and all the people around him are like, all the people around the Chargers fan are like, hey, man, like, chill. And he's just kind of like, what are you talking about? He keeps running at me. I can't do anything but punch him, or he's going to hit me. And so he knocks him out again. All-time low. Got a new low. All-time low. Also heard that there's a video circulating around of a Raiders fan doing coke at the game. I mean, I guess they pat you down. They don't really check you for drugs or whatever. So I'm assuming that's going to inspire a large chunk of fans to come to the game. Because let's be real, when the Raiders were in Oakland, people were just sold to the game and smoke weed. We all know that. They would go to Warriors game and smoke weed in the rafters. I've heard those stories many times before. But yeah, no, it was pretty wild. It was a great game. That was a great game. I had a lot of fun watching Raiders Chargers. That's why I made the other category. That's why I made the this is what we're here for category. The Eagles played the Commanders. We got 2 more games and then we're done here. The Eagles played the Commanders. Sam Howell finally showing some promise. I like it. Most importantly, big thing to take away from this, the Commanders' offensive line, maybe, just maybe, kind of putting it all together. They didn't look completely terrible like they have the first 3 weeks of the season, right? The first 3 weeks of the season, the ball gets snapped, and then all of a sudden there's like 4 defensive linemen in the backfield, and Sam Howell's trying to figure out what to do. You know what I mean? The Eagles' secondary injuries definitely showed themselves in this game. That was the biggest takeaway for me personally. But luckily for them, the defensive line kind of stepped up a little bit. We got like a crazy story to talk about when it comes to naming names in this game. Like it's just where you talk about a player who did really well. Anyway, the Eagles' secondary injuries kind of picked up a little bit. They lost Darius Slay at one point during this game because, ironically enough, Darius Slay hurt his shoulder tackling Logan Thomas, a man whose skull and brain is probably made of glass at this point because Logan Thomas has got like double-digit concussions in the NFL that we know of, right? And it's wild that he continues to play every Sunday. Mad respect to him, either for the love of the game. I'm assuming they're paying him while he's trying to get his money. The Commanders, like I said before, they might have figured it out. That was the cool thing to take away from this. Sam Howell finally able to deal it down the field, man, to throw it to somebody other than Terry McLaurin. The Commanders' crossing routes were killing the Eagles' zone because they did not have the pressure to be able to disrupt all the crossing routes running through the course of the zones and stuff like that. At halftime, the Commanders led this game 17-10. At the end of the second half, Devontae Smith had a sick moss of 2 defensive backs from the Commanders that helped them set up a field goal to make it 17-10. The start of the third happens, and finally, Jalen Hurts lets that thing rip, and he gets it to A.J. Brown, who's up against Emmanuel Forbes Jr. He mosses Emmanuel Forbes and then scores a touchdown on him. Gets a little help from the other 2 wide receivers in terms of downfield blocking, literally blocking defensive backs into the end zone, and he scores relatively quickly on that one. I thought it was pretty cool. Thought it was pretty cool, man. I will point this out. He gets another touchdown. A.J. Brown gets another touchdown later on in this game in the fourth quarter that gives the Eagles the lead again. I think it was like 24-24 was the score, or they were tied up 24-24. No, it was 24-17, and that's how they got the lead. He gets another touchdown later on in the fourth quarter because the Eagles' offense finally started clicking in the second half of this game, finally put it all together, and the defense started playing just as well as the offense did. They were able to flow some drives together and look pretty good overall. A.J. Brown gets another touchdown. He taunts Emmanuel Forbes by throwing the ball into his lap. They give the penalty off of the kickoff, which pushes the kickoff starting point back. It allows a return from Antonio Gibson that gets the ball to the 40-yard line, and it puts the Commanders in a position to only have to go like 30 yards to get a field goal to tie the game up. They needed a touchdown to win it. They only had to go 60 yards to score a touchdown. They kind of piece it together, like piecemeal it together. Sam Howell gets sacked on the first down of this drive. The Eagles force him to throw it away on the next pass after that. He has a pass that is dropped at the 5-yard line right in front of the end zone after they worked their way all the way down there. And if that play, I want to say if it was Curtis Samuels or not, if he had caught that, it would have ended up with the Commanders losing because he would have caught it 3 yards short of the end zone and not been able to score because he got tackled immediately, and that's why he dropped the ball, right? And then the Commanders score one play later, force overtime. The Eagles' defensive line turns up in the overtime period. They sack Sam Howell, force the ball back to the Eagles, and the Eagles do the thing where they like run the ball right down your throat the entire time. That was the thing that happened in the second half of the game too, as well. DeAndre Swift killing it again. Kenneth Gainwell was getting mad yards, and they were turning up in this game. They really did. Final score in this one was a ton of fun. If you didn't watch it, you should have. 34-31 was the final score. They get a kick from Cody Parkey to win it. Sick game. Tons and tons of fun when it was all said and done. Big thing to take away from this, there was a guy who, his name is Nicholas Morrow. Now, remember this when you see him play maybe next Sunday. He's filling in for, who was hurt? Was it Marcus Golden? No, Marcus Golden got a sack in this game. Nicholas Morrow gets 3 sacks in this game. That's a great day for any defensive lineman in the NFL. It's an even better day for Nicholas Morrow. Check this out. Outside linebacker technically. 3 sacks. Before this game, he had 4 career sacks. So he almost doubled his total. Now, that's not even the wildest part, because before this game, the last time Morrow had a sack in the NFL was November 15th of 2020. That's almost 3 years ago. He goes that long without a sack in the NFL, and then he shows back up. He's on the practice squad for the Eagles, gets elevated to the active roster, and then gets 3 sacks in his first elevation. That is amazing. Just like that game was. That's pretty dope. Seems like a guy who's like a fringe roster guy went out there and turned up on him. That was the cool part. The Rams played the Colts. 29-23 was the final score. This one went into overtime again with the Colts. They went into overtime last week with the Baltimore Ravens, and I think I figured it out. The Colts are the most exhausting team in the NFL to play. A lot of people think it's the Miami Dolphins. I think it's the Colts. I think between trying to defend the run or trying to stop the run with Zach Moss, trying to keep up with Anthony Richardson and actually get him down on the ground for sacks, trying to figure out how to stop Michael Pittman Jr., and then on top of that, trying to figure out how to score against their absolutely nasty defense. I think maybe, just maybe, the Colts are the most exhausting team in the NFL to play against. Now, to start off this game, very much like the meme, I'm not going to lie, Coach, they had us in the first half. The Rams are up 20-0 in the first half of this game. Their first 4 drives, the Rams averaged like 9 plays a drive, and they had a drive for 75 yards and a drive for 94 yards. AKA the Colts defense was getting worked by your boy. I'm sure you've heard of him. His name is Puka Nacua. He's got 4 100-yard games in his first 4 career games as an NFL football player. He's a draft pick, 5th-round draft pick. Everybody keeps talking about it. He dropped in the draft because he didn't run a really fast 40 time and he was playing wide receiver. Makes sense. If you watch him play, you don't need to be fast to be able to kill zones. That's what his bread and butter is. He is a master of absolutely finding the gap in zones. He runs directly behind linebackers. He knows how to throttle down and catch the ball with killer timing. And somehow he's instantaneously bonded with Matthew Stafford after we heard all these reports about how Stafford's having a tough time bonding with the younger players on the team. So Van Jefferson did make a temporary appearance at one point during this game. That was pretty cool to see. Seems like he's been forgotten all about. Hopefully that changes when Cooper Kupp comes back this upcoming week, potentially. Him and Von Miller allegedly supposed to be coming back this week. We'll see. Von Miller's supposed to play on Thursday Night Football, potentially for him, according to him. We'll see what happens. The Rams, basically your geniuses, I'll say this much, to mitigate the Colts, right? The Colts offensive line already on the struggle bus to begin with. Gonna be on the struggle bus even more so when they go up against the Rams defense in general. So their brilliant idea was like, hey, the Colts have a backup center in, right? Because Ryan Kelly's out for this game. Instead of just demoralizing the backup center the entire game and potentially getting Quentin Nelson in a double team with the center and the guard, how about we use the greatest defensive tackle of all time as a DN and a nose tackle? What if we just let him bounce all over the place? What if we let Aaron Donald attack from every angle possible so that Anthony Richardson never knows where the real pressure is coming from? Like the Scarecrow effect. Scarecrow from Batman, he has the fear toxin, kind of throws you off a little bit. He fights from the shadows. He uses your fears against you. Anthony Richardson was, let's be real. He was shooketh, as most people would be. We already heard the, oh my God, by the way, there was another game earlier I think it was in Buccaneers Saints. Somebody yelled, oh my God, on a blitz or whatever. And it wasn't Aaron Donald. I think it was like Shaq Barrett or something on a pass rush. Anyway, they did that, and it worked really well, like for all four quarters. And it just got to the point where Anthony Richardson just got accustomed to being under constant duress because every single offensive lineman was getting cooked by one dude for the entirety of this game, and it was kind of wild to see. It felt like it was Aaron Donald versus five guys, and every single time he won on the pressure. I'd love to see the pressure numbers in this game, but I don't pay for stuff that shows me that kind of thing. But it was wild. A lot of good Colts drives got disrupted by Aaron Donald from different angles, and that's kind of why they took a while to kind of get the offense going a little bit, because you can only go so hard for so long in the NFL. We saw that happen a bunch. Basically, one team dominates in the first half, and then all of a sudden, whatever aspect of their team dominated in the first half is non-existent in the second because they utilize so much energy, right? And also on top of that, like adjustments. Would like to point out the Colts offensive line situation right now is the kind of shit that ended up with Andrew Luck retiring during preseason. Just want to put that out there. The Colts don't score in this game until 7:17 in the third quarter. And then the fourth quarter started with a score of 23-8, which, by the way, I think is eerily similar to how the fourth quarter started when they played against the Baltimore Ravens. One thing about Anthony Richardson, like I said, they wear the shit out of their opponent because every single time you trying to get Anthony Richardson down, he don't make it easy. It's a fight every time. He looks like he is what Bomani Jones would call a can't go back all-star. He can't go back to where he came from, so he got to make the best of the situation that he got right now. The fourth quarter was a lesson in domination. The Colts defense, which had been playing really well the entirety of this game, because at the end of the day, the final score, they scored 29 points, and one of those, the touchdown had to come in the second half of the game. Had to come in overtime, so they really only gave up 21 points, right? Or 22. But yeah, the situation was dire, is the way to put it. The Colts defense started ramping up in the second half of this game, and they already were playing really well in the first half. They bodied Matthew Stafford to the point where he has re-injured his hip. They say he has like a hip contusion or whatever, and it looked eerily similar to the Matthew Stafford that I saw play with the Detroit Lions. It looked exactly like that. It was like almost a mirror image, except he was in a different uniform. They were wearing the weird off-white bone-colored uniform, so that was interesting. But yeah, this game comes to what can only be described to like a very cinematic ending. So, Puka Nacua, wide receiver for the Rams, he's having the best rookie wide receiver season ever right now. He's having the best rookie wide receiver season ever right now. He's like first in terms of like yards through 4 games, first in terms of catches through 4 games, all this kind of stuff like that. All these on pace stats, right? He's got all that going for him. He's got like the most catches and yards through 2 games. In 1 game, he has the most catches in a single game by any Rams wide receiver, even in their debut, with 15 in game number 1 versus the Seahawks. And the only thing about Puka that they kind of casually mention at the beginning of the broadcast is Puka's got all these yards, he's got all these catches, and he's got no touchdowns. He hasn't scored. He's 4 games into his career, or 3 games into his career, 3.5 at this point. Well, really, by the time overtime started, he was 4 games into his career because overtime, he had already played the 4 quarters. But this overtime ends with Puka Nacua catching his first ever NFL touchdown. And it's a game winner. It is insane, the kind of foreshadowing that happened during the broadcast. And then the even cooler part was, which I think a lot of us can relate to, I've recently found out that Puka's cool with Dana White, which makes me suspicious of him. The other part is, after he scored that game-winning touchdown, he was like, I got to call my mom, in the locker room with his pads on, and he calls his mom. I was like, yeah, I feel like I would do that too. It's pretty sick. That's all I got. That's the end of my breakdown for week 4. Ladies and gentlemen, tell me what you think. Hit me up. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Drop your comments. Tell me what you thought about week 4. Give me some positive, negatives, things you hated, things you liked, player names, individual players that you like their performance. Drop some predictions based off of week 4 or what we've seen up until this point in week 4. Who's going to suck? Who's going to be great? Hit me up on Twitter at FB_playbook. Hit me up on Instagram at the Ashton Forever. I put in my IG chat pretty much every day before one of the podcast drops because the next podcast is supposed to be on Friday. We'll see what happens. Appreciate everybody who hopped into the chat because I want to say there was like 20 different unique people who hopped into the chat, and maybe I'll start actually doing my homework before, aka watching all of the football games before Tuesday goes down. And I appreciate everybody who hopped in. Noah, Sycon, shout out to 804 Peel SS out here for staying through the entire show. Really appreciate everybody else out there who didn't type into the chat but is still out there looking. I see you. Those 2 other people. That being said, I'm out of here. This is the part where I'm supposed to play the music, but my music player app closed. I don't know why that happened. Anyway, let's open it again, shall we? Hopefully it's not going to ask me to restart. There we go. Here we go. By the way, shout out to happy belated birthday to Christina Gukas. Any song that you hear on this podcast is made by Christina Gukas out of her SoundCloud account, and you should check out her travel vlogs on YouTube. Her name is Christina, like Christina Aguilera, and her last name is Guckes. Follow her on follow her on YouTube. That's the name of her YouTube, is just her name, and she does travel vlogs. She went to like Salem, Massachusetts, and did a bunch of tours and stuff like that, and kind of popped off a little bit. Check it out. On the other hand, it was her birthday very recently. That's why I said shout out to her. Also, thanks to her for like letting me use all this music forever, because I would be lost without having this music. Anyway, wash your hands, wash your ass, and most importantly, go home, Roger.